Assalamualaikum, everybody. Welcome to the discussion on Wael Hallaq's Impossible State on Chapter 5. Just to run through the subheadings in the chapter. So, the Chapter 5, we're discussing the political subject and the moral technologies of the self. And as he does in his previous chapters, he makes a comparison of the two subheadings in the chapter. So, in the political subject, he talks about uh, the political subject in the modern nation state, and then the moral technologies of the self. He talks about um, the role of Sharia in governing the Muslims' um, morality, Muslims' moral sphere. And then he makes a very brief comparison between the two, and we can deliberate on the points he has raised on the two segments. I mean, when
Mhm.
I read it, I think about myself as a Singaporean, and I was raised on propaganda. I mean, as are everybody, as everyone can attest to in Singapore. And but the thing here is, Weil insists that we all went along with it. Just because the model is like that, therefore the assumption is all of us just went along with it. That's the point of contention that I have with a lot of the things that he says.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
This
salam.
is Tahir.
Walaikum salam to him, please.
And I was thinking perhaps I can give a quick summary of the way I was thinking about this chapter in the context of the whole book. And maybe from there, everybody else could raise the points where they don't agree or where they do agree. And maybe that would be a bit helpful for everybody to get on the same page. Um, so, so the summary, Sister Salma, that you gave on the uh, group. That was fantastic, really. I think just on the starting point, I think the whole book, the way Halak started is that he was not really starting from the point of view of Islam. He was sort of trying to find a moral guide guidance for the modern state. That's how he sort of starts his first preface. He mentions three phenomena that the narcissistic individuals, then social disintegration, and then the environmental damage, and says that any system of governance which has come up with these results must have, it cannot be moral. And then he says that there has been a project going on in the West where they're trying to go back into the Western tradition and see if they can source morality from Aristotle, from Plato, like pre-Renaissance morality kind of things. And what Halak says that he proposed that why not try sourcing from Islam? And then he says that in his attempt to do so, he thinks that these two are not compatible, and the rest of the book is about this thing. And then obviously the rest of the summary, as you said. And then, so he starts with saying like the five characteristics of the modern state, not necessarily nation state, and that's an interesting thing. I think only in this fifth chapter, he, for the first time, talks about nationalism. He didn't really talk about nationalism before this point at all. He started from the point of view of state, modern state, from modernism, Renaissance, and all that. But only now he's talking about nationalism. And I'll get to that and why he's only talking about nationalism now. The way I see it is that he started with the five characteristics that he thinks is historically integral to the current modern state system. And then then the next chapter, he starts by talking about the conception, the ontology of the state, the way it's conceptualized as the will, the highest will, the supreme will of the nation, of the people under that state. So that's the first chapter that he, like the after the preface, after pointing out the five characters, then this is the first point that he makes. And then he basically expands on these things. Like if this is the conceptualization of the state, of the governance system, then how does that affect making law? And how does that differ from the pre-modern Sharia-based paradigm where we did not conceptualize governance like that. Governance was not the supreme will, and the supreme will obviously it only belonged to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and then it was fixed, and it was Sharia that was the paradigm. So he was in all these subsequent chapters, he basically picks a topic, and then he shows that uh, how that ended up being shaped by the initial difference in the initial modern thought and in the initial thought of the theoretical thought of the Islam. That's how I think he sort of approaches these things. So first he talks about the law because he talks about conceptualization of the state, and then he talks about the conceptualization of the sovereignty and how that differs. And these differences leads to the difference in the way the law is being made in modern state and how it was made in the previous pre-modern Islamic uh, governance. And then in the previous one, in the chapter 4, he's talking about the legal and the political. And he basically says that because the modern state is coming from a Renaissance philosophy, this is all positivism. There is no underlying morality there. There is no sense of ought. There is only ease. If we are to use, if we are to talk about in Hallaq's language. And what happens, he says, is that uh, that basically uh, the secular kind of ideologies are basically just a replacement for what we had before, which was the religion. And now in place of that, we have all this capitalism and all these things. So, so the legal and then the political. And the political, he says that the citizens are basically sacrificing, they're forming their political identity. Sorry, are you guys, sorry, it's my daughter over there. Just give me a second, sorry.
I mean, excuse me, while he's taking care of whatever he's taking care of, there's so many problems with what he just said. I can't even begin to list all of the problems with what brother just said, which is he's not saying his own words. I know he's giving a summary of Hallaq's position, and it's faulty and flawed from start to finish. I don't even know if I can list everything, but it starts from the very beginning when he's talking about his premise for even writing the book and saying, well, we have to look at basically the immoral outcomes in the West and see the state system or the governmental system that led to that. What makes you think the governmental system led to that? That's not why. Your government is immoral because your people are immoral, because you don't have a moral basis in your life. This is what I've been saying from the beginning. Your problem is kufr. It doesn't matter what system you have. This is your problem. It's not the result of the system. This is already a mindset that that morality and decency can only be regulated by the state or by the government, from the top down. He's entering the discussion with the assumption that morality and virtue and decency and goodness and what have you can only be imposed upon the people or regulated by the state, and otherwise the people will not be that way. He's absolutely dedicated to misdirecting and diverting attention away from the real source of the problems in the West, to attribute the problems to the state and so on. This is not their problem. This is not the source of the problem at all. It's from the beginning, the premise is wrong. And then from there, you have many other wrong things. Like I said, I don't even know if I can list all of them from what the brother just said.
Yes, I think he's back.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly, I think, what Hallaq also points out here, to be honest, in this 5th chapter. I think there was someone in the group chat who mentioned that he jumped from discussing about modern state to Imam Ghazali, to Sufism in this chapter. So how does he make that connection? How does he make that position? And I think he's basically making this same argument that in the modern state, it is the state who is forming the individuals. And all these all these previous chapters, he was saying what the states are doing in the current system. First, the state was making law, and then the state is making the legal and what he calls the legal and the political. And in this chapter, he says that the state is trying to shape the individual. The state is trying to make subjects, is trying to mold the subjectivity of the citizens and trying to mold the morality of the citizens. Basically, he says psychology. He even says psychology of the citizens, and he contrasts that with the Islamic tradition and the pre-modern tradition, where it was not the state who did that, where it was not the government who did it. It was that was exactly the point he was actually making, that in Islam,
No, it's not.
the
No,
government
I'm sorry.
is not
I'm
supposed
sorry.
to do this.
Or else you're misunderstanding me. Because I'm saying that the state does not do that. He is saying that the state is responsible for the immoral outcomes. The state is not responsible for the immoral outcomes. The kufr is responsible for the immoral outcomes, and it wouldn't matter what form of government you have. You're going to get the same immoral outcomes because you're an immoral society, and that wasn't imposed upon you by the government. The government was created by an immoral society, by a misguided society, and they're never going to find a way to be a moral society by means of any government that they can come up with, because their problem is essentially they're in the darkness. You know, it's not what he's saying. According to even what you said he's saying, it's the opposite. I'm saying that his presumption that the state is responsible for the immorality of the people is wrong. It's not correct.
That's a very good point, to be honest, Ustad. But can I just quote one sentence from him? Basically, I just copied and pasted from the chapter. He says, the Sharia without a moral community, which assumes morally grounded individuals, was not Sharia. So basically, he's saying that we have a moral community, that Islam has a moral community. And this is what the modern state doesn't have as a repercussion.
But it's not about the modern
But
state,
it
bro.
does, yeah.
But
It's
that's
not
not
about the
because of the
modern state.
state. That's not because of the government system, but because of the Enlightenment ideas. One form of kuffar, definitely. I mean, that is what permitted their society. That is what gave birth to this government system. And what he's trying to say is that because it was born in that sort of kuffar, which has these particular characteristics, that even Christianity or other religions, they didn't have that. They had some sort of truth claim. They had some sort of morality, at least. But the modern state is based upon Kant and all these philosophers who were basically trying to start from secularism, that there is no supernatural, there is nothing beyond human will. And that's why, and because the state was created by these people, as Ustad is saying, because these people, these are the type of people that created this system. So that's why they needed the police, that like the way he explains here. That's why they needed the school. That's why they needed the hospital and the public health to be the way it is. So it is sort of like a cyclical thing, I think. The way he starts, he starts with some sort of form of kuffar, some form of philosophy. He explains how that led to the way the government is formed, and then he says that how that is affecting the different things in the society and in the individual level, which was formed entirely differently in Islam because of the Islam's inherent theology. And I think that's how he sort of approaches every topic, really. I mean, it's not like he just says that it's the government which has done this. He sort of says, like, sort of puts the blame on those philosophers in a sense, because that their idea produced this state, and this state is basically has become and had to serve these things, because they have taken out all the morality from the society. They've taken out all the morality from the community and from the individual. So all these gaps had to be filled in by this new thing, which doesn't have anything.
Okay, but that's an assumption that the morality was there to begin with.
Which is why he goes back to the romanticism of the past. That's why he's invoking Aristotle and Plato and so on. He invokes them because the West tries to romanticize a time
Okay, but look at their society. Look at ancient Rome. Look at ancient Greece. How moral was their society? It was just as debauched and depraved as theirs is right now. There's no difference. There's no difference.
And he refuses to.
It's a false dichotomy to pretend.
Yeah.
Said before, we shouldn't go by their division of time.
Timeline. Yeah, exactly.
Their timeline is false. We have to look at it from the correct point of view, the actual realistic point of view, not what they tell us. You didn't have a Dark Ages and then an Enlightenment and then a modern period. You've had one single way of being. And the only thing that changed was the personnel at the top. That's all. So when you had a theocracy, which is what they had and which we never had, actually, it's the same as having a king. It's the same as having a prime minister, or it's the same as having a president. You can pretend that the sovereign before the Enlightenment, the sovereign was God, but of course it wasn't. It was the Pope. It was a man, because you don't have laws in Christianity. You don't have a code of law, a penal code, or anything like that. You don't have those kind of rules and regulations in Christianity. It's not in the Bible. The Jews have it to a degree, but the Christians never did. So it was always whatever the Pope said. If the Pope said thus and so, then that was the law. When the Pope decided that they should go, that the Europeans should go to the Muslim world for the Crusades, he said God wills it. What he meant was he willed it, and to them it's the same thing. The king is the Godhead for them. That was always the case, and it's no different when you call it secularism. It's a secular theocracy that they have now. It's no different in reality.
And also this point about in the earlier chapters when he talks about, I think, the separation of powers, where he actually has the audacity to claim that the Sharia is institutionally defunct in Muslim societies, and that's a point of contention. I have personal problems with that, because I come from secular Singapore, but it's completely a fantasy of his to imagine that Islam is completely divorced from my person. That's a complete false dichotomy. And also the fact that you imagine that public law, because we have this nation states, okay, never mind Singapore, okay, Malaysia, Indonesia, that just because there's something called the public law making, because of the territorial borders and boundaries that we have, that this is not a negotiated space with Sharia at its epicenter. You insist that Sharia is absent. Hallaq insists on that. So this is a problem, because it's not based on reality. And because it's his book and he talks about it like that, readers are not expected to take it. So that's why we're having this discussion, and we're challenging the things that he's claiming. And this is one of the challenge that I agree on the subjectivity that he talks about in chapter 5. Yes, the institutions that the modern nation states have formed and developed is with at its epicenter, the whole goal is to productivity, materialism, all of that. Yes, and it's, as Shahid said, kufr based, and that's something that we need to identify. And just because that is the way it is projecting a country forward, it doesn't mean that the Muslims there are now therefore without tawheed, or without are incapacitated from acting according to tawheed. That's another claim that he makes in the book, which is highly problematic.
Well, I mean, first of all, just with regards to that, again, you can't go to any Muslim country today and ask anyone in the government whether Allah is sovereign or not, and get a negative response. Every Muslim in politics, every Muslim in government will uphold the sovereignty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's just a fact. You're not going to find that. And if a Muslim government has to implement laws, has to implement rules in their country that either constitute a lack of Sharia, in other words, they're not implementing something that is in the Sharia, or if they are implementing something that contradicts with the Sharia, that will be if you look into it, the result of coercion and colonization. It will be the result of coercion and colonization and responding to the real circumstances that they are in and the choices that they have. It's not a matter that they have discarded the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Sunnah. It's not that they've discarded the Sharia. It's that they're in certain circumstances. So it would be like saying that if a starving Muslim is forced to eat pork to survive, he has discarded the Sharia. No, this is coercion. This is compulsion. And they have to make an ijtihad as to try to approach the situation in as Islamically a way as they possibly can, in a way that complies with the Sharia as much as they can. And that is Islamic governance. That's what they've always done. So I reject this whole premise.
Okay, Tala has raised her hand, so Tala's next. You can unmute yourself, Tala.
Assalamu alaikum. I think that, yeah, I do have an issue with him kind of, just say, completely divorcing the state from Sharia, as, making it sound like they're completely incompatible. If anything, in a very globalized world, I have to say, it does help bring more organized systems in place. And you need it. You actually do need these organized systems in place. And nonetheless, you still have modern, say the Gulf, for example, or modern states where there are certain areas where people still do govern themselves. And people actually, if you're talking about Bedouin communities or communities that are a little bit off the grid, they very much govern themselves, and the state has absolutely no say in how they choose to rule their own people. So they're not necessarily incompatible. And if the country was indeed completely against the way these smaller communities govern themselves, then they do have every power to stop that from happening if they think it's an issue. But because we know that these smaller communities do tend to run according to certain Islamic laws. That I'm giving the example of Muslim countries per se. I think the issue though that I do feel like he kind of touches on and is important to bring up is nationalism. I do think that with a modern state, you do have the concept of nationalism is definitely more. Yeah, it's a challenge. I don't know how. So in the sense that you do come across classes of people who do feel that sense of superiority as well. People do have the right, for example, to have this, or citizens have the right to have a sense of pride when it comes to where they're coming from and how their country's developing and how the government is contributing to their own growth and how they're contributing to the country's growth. It's a, give and take relationship. But then to also fall into the trap of feeling superior to other surrounding states, I think that's where the issue lies. And I think, I'm just kind of I'm just thinking as I speak, just trying to compare between the West and the East and the way it happens. I don't know how it happens in like Far East Asia, but I'm looking at a more Middle Eastern perspective, I suppose, where people have, in ways, they do tend to be classified as well in terms of, Arabs, non-Arabs, etc. So there is a sense of superiority that happens underlying it. I wouldn't say it's the state. I don't want to say it's the state's fault per se, perhaps, but I think it is something that needs to be addressed in these discussions. So that's all I have to say. Sorry.
Jazakallah khair, Tala. I think what Tala is trying to talk about is, he does highlight in the book about the problem of nationalism, but it's not so much about how individuals feel superior to another by virtue of whatever it is, whatever values or qualities they may assume they have compared to other people. I don't think that's his area of interest at all. The premise of his discussion is, okay, if you have two circles, one being the West, the domain, the central domain of that Western circle is political dominion, political power. Everything that this Western model seeks to pursue is with this goal in mind: complete dominion, exploitation of nature, resources, whatever it is that you have. The goal is production and materialism. And then Islam has in its central domain morality. So everything that comes out of this central domain, which is the paradigm that he's talking about for Muslims, it's all flawless, pretty much. Okay, he wants to deny what actually took place in history, in our history, that it's not as simple and black and white as that. That we do have the more, you see, in denying, in claiming that we have now Sharia as institutionally defunct in chapter 3, and then he goes on to chapter 5 in the technologies of the moral self. He talks about how we have not earlier he says that we have relegated Islam to just in the private sphere. Okay, and then here in chapter 5 he talks about how this practices that we have in the private sphere is central to our morality and the driver of our conscience and our person as Muslims. I mean, there's a point where in the book where he even makes blanket takfir, like if you don't pray on purpose, then you have apostated. It says that in the book. Okay, so I think he's confused, and correctly, because he's not a Muslim. He's writing from a purely academic point of view. So I can see the confusion very clearly, because again, he's contradicting himself. He says that, Muslims are not really Muslims today because they're only paying lip service. But then at the same time, that's the 5 daily prayers, the 5 pillars of Islam is the foundation that makes everybody moral for for Muslims, and so I there's going to be a lot of conflict up until this point. Now he's going to go into onto economy and how the economy actually affects us. And like I said in the discussion, if his complaint is about how governments and countries are subject to private business and private entities that compel us to go into a direction that is against our moral principles and values, okay, I'm willing to go along with it. But he has yet to come to that point, obviously, because of he wants to make his premise and everything clear before he goes into that. So that's for the next 2 chapters to go into. So anybody else would like to add to this?
Can I just comment?
Yeah, sure, please.
First, with regards to nationalism, I agree to an extent. However, I would challenge the idea or any suggestion that this is a new phenomenon in any way, shape, or form, and that it is, again, the creation of the modern state, because it simply is not. Historically, that's not true. Within the Islamic lands, we've had this issue to the extent that you even have different khilafah. You have a khalifa for one region and another khalifa for another region and another sultan for another region, and you have divisions on the basis of nationality and region and locality, and you have a sense of identity based on your locality, a sense of identity based on your region, a sense of identity based on your land. That's nothing new. That's not the creation of the nation state. That's not the creation of the modern state, and so forth. And then I'll go back again. I hate to keep repeating it, but this idea that the modern state, you'll have to remind me maybe if I can't remember, that it emphasizes productivity and profitability and so on, and progress and all of those things, and not morality. That's their morality. That is their morality. It's just, it's not, every government follows a set of values. They don't all follow the same set of values. And the values that they have, there will be crossover. There's overlap between our values and their values. There's crossover, there's overlap. But the things that we prioritize, they deprioritize. It's on the list, but it's near the bottom. At the top of the list is so-called progress, profitability, productivity, and so on. That's what they prize the most. That's their value set. That's their list of priorities in terms of values. That's not ours. So obviously they will and always have had a system that emphasizes those values over the values that are more important to us. So again, it's still pretending that this is some kind of a modern phenomenon and that it's the result of the system rather than the system being the result of the society as it already exists. and the morals and the values that they possess and always have. That's all.
Very clear. Thank you.
Yeah, so instead of pretending that the modern state has deficiencies, he has to, talk about the type of, I don't know, the negation of morality in these different societies or countries or whatever it is that you have identified, which is why, again, coming back to the practicality and applicability of what he's talking about is frustrating, because there's none. It's just theories. He just leaves us with theories and we just have to accept it. It's like he's compelling us to accept it. There's no conversation actually taking place in the book. He's just telling you, this is what it is. This is how it is. And then you have the alarmists and the Islamists, who believe that the goal of seeking power and governmental power is to ensure that you could enforce this morality on the public.
Well, I mean, that is one of the responsibilities of power for us. That is absolutely one of the responsibilities of the authorities. There's no question about that. And that's another issue. If he doesn't think that that's the case, if he doesn't think that in Islam or in the Muslim world that that's supposed to be one of the responsibilities of government, then he's sorely mistaken.
No,
Obviously,
he imagines that it's absent in the Muslim world today because of the formation of the nation states, which is clearly false.
It's not, okay. It's not. This is what I'm saying. It's not even absent in the West. It's just a different value system. It's a different morality. But they absolutely impose their morality. That's why you have conflicts in the West with people, for example, who don't agree with LGBT, but it's being imposed upon them because their value system says you must tolerate this, you must accept this. That's their value system. And then there are people in the society who don't share that exact same value system and who reject it, and it's being imposed upon them. So yes, the state in the so-called modern state, yes, they do impose their sense of morality. There's no question about it. It's unavoidable. There isn't actually such a thing as an amoral state. They have a value system. It's just not ours. They have their own moral priorities, and they're not our moral priorities. They value the so-called liberty and freedom, and everybody do what they want to do, and the individual and so forth, and that's not what we value. In the same way, we don't define it the same way. But obviously, if you look at their founding documents and so forth, you see that they articulate what their values are, and they try to adhere to them, and they have in the Supreme Court and what have you, constitutional lawyers and so on will debate about whether or not this actually upholds the principles and the values of the Constitution. So the whole thing, this is what I mean. The whole thing is so flawed, in my opinion. The whole premise is so flawed and mistaken. There's so many holes in it that it's I don't know.
Yeah,
It doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, Brother
yeah.
Kareem?
No, like the more one reads, it's really like where is he coming from? Where is he going? Why is he telling me this? Right? Like there are constantly these questions like why are you talking about Niyya? Like what is the purpose? How is Niyya connected to Sharia and to nation states? Like are you gonna question my intentions with how I'm fasting, how I'm praying, how I'm doing zakah? Like what is your issue, man? Like what are you doing, right? Like I could keep, I get to some section and I'm like, what, right? And exactly as Ustaz's brother Shahid said, like, yeah, they have a moral system, right? It's called kufr, right? And it takes, different values every 50 years, right? For a while we prioritize race, then we prioritize, whatever LGBTQ, then we prioritize nuking Iraq, right? Different values for different sessions, right? Like for different, periods. So yeah, like I'm confused when I'm reading the book. I'm just confused, to be honest. Like I don't know who it's intended for. What is he trying to achieve? Who is he trying to convince? I cannot find the answers, to be honest. And if I do, they're probably like sinister, right? And I don't want to, assume that he's just trying to, mess
Yeah,
up
like when you ask,
countries and people in them.
who is he trying to convince? This is like, I don't think he's
The
addressing the
leader,
Muslims. Yeah,
been
like
gonna
he's
read
just
it and be like, "Oh my God, great job!" man."
it's like he's an Orientalist. So whoever is receiving this is receiving it like it's meant for an Orientalist.
Yeah.
Because you want to
Like
just
you said, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's all theory. None of this reflects reality. Neither for our part of the world, nor even for the West. It doesn't reflect reality. This is all in Hallaq's mind. It's his conception of things, honestly. Because like again, like what I was saying about the West. Every policy that they implement in the West, I can only talk about the US, but I'm sure it's the same everywhere else, always has to be sold on the basis of its morality. They sell it on. I mean, you can cross-reference this with the propaganda book. They have to sell every policy based on the values and the ideals and the principles that they have indoctrinated their public with. So how is this not present in the state? I don't understand. In reality, it's obviously present. It's just a different moral code, which is a moral code again based on kufr. So just say that,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
to
sorry.
put the problem to where it actually is.
I was just thinking, like, if some Muslim scholar wrote a book about like the intention of Christians when they're eating bread or drinking wine, right? Like, really, like, like if you try to flip the narrative as if some Muslim is trying to advise Christians how to be Christian and how to adopt Christian values, like, I don't know, it just seems so far-fetched and
No, you see, the point here is he seems to put a timeline on when Muslims really, really were Muslims. There's the pre-modern times and the modern times, as if it's like there's a dichotomy in the timeline, and that if I went back 500 years, okay, and met somebody, that we will not recognize each other.
and he would be
But
Muslim there, right?
yeah, like bar the amenities and the facilities that modernity, the material creature comforts that modernity has brought about, I really doubt that I would have anything different with my great-great-grandfather or grandmother if I met them. If I go back in time, I refuse to accept that because, again, I'm not talking about the material sense here, okay? Obviously, materially, we are very different, right? We have cars, we don't ride on horses or whatever. As a Muslim, if I went back 500 years or 600 years or whatever, I'm going to recognize the Muslims and they will recognize me. The audacity to say,
Yeah, I mean,
Salama,
I'm
can
trying to give him
you-
more
I'm
benefit of
sorry.
doubt than that, to be honest. But I think the issue comes in the fact that it almost sounds like Islam is. I mean, when you look at it the other way around, it also sounds like Islam is just not compatible with the modern
yes.
age. If that makes sense. When we are, we're meant to believe that it's compatible for all ages and days, and like you can still like it's not black and white. There's a lot of gray and like very, the gray is a lot more when you compare it to black and white when it comes to rulings and opinions about different things, starting from even the way you pray all the way to the way you live your life, right? The things that are black and white are actually quite few in comparison. So it almost sounds like it's inflexible. And it almost sounds like he's like, yeah, there is an issue. Rarely, there is an issue with him trying to get into people's intentions as well, when it comes to what you choose to do and how you choose to pray or how you choose to fast. Or there's certain, I mean, there are sentences that are a bit funny, but I think, I mean, I don't know. I also feel like, if I were a non-Muslim reading this, right? So I think this is, when we're talking about who's the audience that he's trying to appeal. I haven't, the thing is, this is my first book as well, reading for him, so I don't know what, the details of the other books that he's written, sorry. But if I were a non-Muslim reading this, coming from a place of that we quite often see, to be honest, of that, they have this sense of emptiness that they feel when it comes to certain morals and when it comes to certain, I don't know, the rules by which they live their life, I suppose, as a non-Muslim reading this, I'd find it appealing to know that there is a moral system that covers all aspects of my humanity as a person, you know, including the spiritual, emotional, intellectual, that goes beyond my control. I don't know if that makes sense. So I feel like I'm trying to give him benefit of the doubt. I feel like he is trying to appeal to the non-Muslim reading this in a way. I think if I were to come from that mentality, then I might find Islam actually more appealing in a way. But the issue is you also create those fanatics who come into Islam, you know, like the very fresh converts who take everything in Islam as black and white. On the other hand, and you know, this is where the issue lies, I suppose. Like, you know, as a person, oh, I really like what, you know, they can turn it very easily into something that's black and white and doesn't necessarily fit with the modern day, and they decide that they want to go live in the desert or something. Like, you know what I mean? But yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to give him benefit of doubt.
And not even that, to be honest. I mean, if just going carrying on from the thread of Ustad Shahid and Sister Salama, if I may just read a quote from Halak about the morality in West, he doesn't actually deny it. To be honest, I think these three questions, like what Sister Salama said, like why is Halak saying that the Sharia is defunct institutionally? That's one thing. And then the other question about what about the morality in the West? They do have some morality in the West, obviously. So how is he accounting for it? I think there is a good quotation, and that might give us an answer. It is here. Western moral philosophy, as we saw, has developed certain critical strands of thought whose effect is a call to draw on the moral repertoire of the European intellectual heritage. That is exactly what Ustad Shahid was saying. That is from before the pre-modern era. So Halak is not denying the existence of morality in the West. What he's saying that it is the state who is basically defining the morality. It is not living up to a morality which is already there. The morality is subservient to the government, not the other way around. And what he's trying to make a case of in all these points is that with pre-modern, and yeah, I'm saying the word pre-modern here in the sense that before the current government system that we see, in the Muslim world, there was a moral system which was above any government. And I think there were other quotes there as well. Like I think there was one that says about what is inalienable to humans, regardless of any government. And that I think is what Halak is trying to point at, that in West, there is nothing, there is no such thing. Everything is being determined by the government, whether it's liberalism, whether it's communism, whatever it is, whatever the state approves finally after the internal, rivalry between different factions, that becomes the morality. But in case of Islam, it wasn't that the Sultan or the Caliph had the chance to decide, had the last say on deciding what is morality. It was already there in the society. This is why I think what Halak is saying is actually quite in line with what Ustad Shahid is saying, in my opinion. Like Ustad Shahid makes this point that even before modernity, the West had the same problem. That's what Ustad Shahid says. And this book doesn't go back into the West. Like the first characteristic that Halak points out is that the current government system, nation, is a European phenomenon. This came out of Europe. And what Ustad Shahid said, that perfectly explains why no other civilization had the necessity to formulate a government like this, that has to do all these moral works, that has to do all these, shaping up the individuals, formulation of the legalities and all that. We didn't need that. And that's exactly what Halak is saying. We didn't need our government to do that. And so basically, because they didn't have it even before the modern era, even before when they had religion, that is why, and he says this in other parts, that the modern state is basically just a secularized version of previous theocracy. He quotes someone about it. And this is exactly in line with what Ustad Shahid is saying. This is something that he never inquires, Halak never inquires why it is a European phenomenon. He never does that. He just says this is the characteristic. And Ustad Shahid answer provides a very, in my opinion, I'm not, I mean, it makes sense to me. This is exactly why it came out of Europe and nowhere else. Because there were always always in necessity of a government like this. On the other hand, as exactly what Sister Salma is saying, we still have, despite being under a government of that form, despite being under the colonial power for 200, 300 years, the Muslim countries today still have the society and the Sharia. And that is exactly why we didn't really need the government. We survived despite having a government like this, which is adversary to us, to our system of producing morality, to our system of producing law. Still, our society kept producing the morality, kept producing the individuals. And Hallaq just says this, and he says that why does the Muslim need this kind of government then? What is the necessity of the Muslims for this kind of government? That's exact. I'm sorry that I didn't copy and paste that bit, but he did kind of say the same kind of thing, that Muslims have to decide that what use that this Western form of government has to offer to them, whereas they already have such a thing. Let me see if I have it here. If the Sharia is also psychological, no, I don't think I have. I didn't copy and paste that bit. So I think when Hallaq says that Sharia is defunct, and then also he goes on to talk about how, and this is another point that I wanted to make. This is exceptional in my opinion, that as a sociologist or whatever he is, social scientist, and he's comparing between the modern state and he's looking into Sharia, but he goes into ibadah, not muamalat. He doesn't go into the laws and the legalities of the fiqh, but goes into the ibadah. And he starts from there, and this whole chapter, he just talks about how this ibadah formulates an individual instead of talking about muamala. And that's how he shows that how thick our morality is. It is, as he says, it's a moral cosmology and all that. But the thing is, and he basically says that West has got nothing to offer in which is this deeply moral. And he says, and this is basically what is just the line that I was saying. Western moral philosophy, as we saw, has developed certain critical strands of thought whose effect is a call to draw on the moral repertoire of the European intellectual heritage. But this remains only a rather thin attempt that has not come anywhere close to becoming an emerging paradigmatic force, much less a paradigm. And this is what Islam had, the state and its successfully modern subject also, as we'll soon see. So this is about the next chapter.
All right.
So although we have fiqh, is our government. So we had 4 madhab, which Muslim countries run by a Hanafi madhab today. We all have nationalistic laws. I mean, we still have fiqh, we still have Sharia for sure, but our government, our society at individual level, they are still there, and Hallaq doesn't dispute that. But the government that we have adopted, the system that we have adopted, we haven't adopted that to become responsive to our Sharia, to our society, to our individuals. And this is my take, basically.
Yeah, you have
yeah.
pretty much described his book, which is basically a contradiction. So you're saying that the nation state model does not serve the Muslim. Okay, let's not talk about everybody else, but for the Muslims, it prevents the Muslim from being optimally moral, and it's the modern state is at fault.
No, I don't think that's the point. I think at individual and social level, Muslims can be as moral as they ever were, but the government is not really responsive to that morality. The
That's
government
not
is out of it. And the thing is, and to be honest, when the government is out of it, it becomes a force in the negative, in the opposite way. I'll give you an example. For example, our education. Okay, uh, because, for example, think about it like this. It is unthinkable, to be honest, in a paradigmatic pre-modern Muslim society for a government even to consider, even to debate whether there could be homosexual law, LGBTQ right or not. It's inconceivable because whatever is legal had to be moral in the society first. And we know that in nowhere in the Muslim countries, it is socially moral. It's not. And despite that, in Bangladesh, in my country, we are having these debates among the government people, and these people are individually, they're Muslims, they're praying and everything. That is all fine. And they wouldn't call this to be a moral practice at all. They will say this is not moral. They will say that I don't support it. But the thing is, they think the law is a different entity, just like any other modern state thinks. The modern here doesn't mean a timeline. It means a kind of philosophy, basically, the modern philosophy, to be honest, from enlightenment. So this is the problem with the government. The way they formulate law is the same way a Western nation formulates law. And that is designed not to be not to be not to be at the mercy of the social morality. Rather, it is designed to dictate the social morality. And that's what they try, and we sort of fight back against it from the community, from the level of individual. But it's no longer in a harmony at all. We used to be in a harmony. I think Hallaq likes this quote about
See,
being harmony.
this is at
Anyways,
this point I have to interrupt here because again, Hallaq is putting forth that there was harmony, and we don't have all the information about what took place in history, in the records of pre-modern, and this is the thing. It's based off of an assumption, and we have to accept everything that Hallaq says, and he removes history and facts on the ground out of the discussion, out of the conversation. He's putting up ideals that he has in his mind, and like in the case that you pointed out, because I would like to close pretty quickly because we're reaching the hour already. So just to just before I end my points and allowing others to speak, I just want to say that he's trying to, like you said, Fahim, you mentioned your example in Bangladesh, that you're assuming that maybe pre-modern Bangladesh would never have pontificated or discussed this matter.
I would assume that it would be a discussion between the fiqh people, between our ulama, not
Yes.
between the ruler.
Yes, but you don't know
And
that.
the ulama, and that, no, but that's what our history says. I mean, I'm not saying that the rulers didn't make any laws that went against the ulama. I'm not saying that, but we knew that they don't tell us. They are not the people who make the law.
Yes, I
Allah
understand.
makes the law, and
Yes,
the
we
ulama are the
understand that.
ones who says it. And
Yes.
whatever the rulers do, it is sort of like a is secondary to it, and it's something merely practical. There is no ideological weight behind it. There is no weight of
No,
faith behind it.
I think that the problem with the lawmakers maybe in Bangladesh today may need those individuals may have some issues. Like you wouldn't have the problem like that in Malaysia or Indonesia, for example. It's unthinkable today, So I think it depends on, your own, your own, it's whether it's based on kufr or not.
This is
Can I ask-
again. Let me. I know we want to close, but first of
Yeah.
all, with regard to the situation of Bangladesh or any other Muslim country, again, this to me this is part of Wael Hallaq trying to divert attention by talking about the state model as the source of the problem. This is with the West, he diverts attention from the real source of the problem, which is the kufr, and in the Muslim world, he diverts attention from the real source of the problem, which is colonization and lack of sovereignty, lack of economic sovereignty, and lack of political independence. So I don't know what Bangladesh would do if they had full, absolute sovereignty and political independence. I don't know what their decisions would be if they weren't subject to the IMF. I don't know what they would do if they weren't subject to big pharma. You understand? They don't have the same freedom that they would have if they have economic sovereignty and political independence, which is one of the reasons why these are priorities for Middle Nation and everything that we try to put out to talk about these issues, because they are core key issues. That's why I said that when you find Muslim countries either omitting something from the Sharia or implementing something that contradicts the Sharia, if you look into it, you'll find coercion is there, that those states are under coercion, that those governments are under some form of coercion or colonization. So you can't remove that and pretend that Bangladesh is in a vacuum and actually has the freedom and the sovereignty to do whatever they want to do. That's one thing. And then with the issue of the idea of under a nation state, you couldn't possibly have, if you wanted to implement Sharia, then you have, say, in Malaysia, for the example, it would be Shafi'i madhab. That would be the madhab, and they have a certain punishment in the Shafi'i madhab for drinking alcohol. Okay. If we're talking about their implementing Sharia, the entirety of Islam itself, the entirety of Islam, the basic principle and theme of Islam is trying to help people get away from punishment. That's the whole theme of Islam, to try to get people away from punishment. First, it's punishment from the hellfire, and then it's a principle in the Sharia, it's a principle in fiqh to try as much as possible to avoid the had, imposing the had on anyone, to come up with as many ways as possible to make it difficult to impose a punishment on people. So that's part of implementation of Sharia, which is also the principles and the ideals and the values of the Sharia and of fiqh, and the values and the principles and the ideals of a qadi. And no issue will be brought before the qadi. I mean, the qadi doesn't have to make a ruling on what you do with this man in the masjid who's drinking alcohol, this poet. The qadi doesn't have to make a ruling on that unless someone brings the matter to him. And people tend to resolve their matters between themselves. It happens now. There's people who drink now in the so-called nation state of Malaysia. There's Muslims who drink now. There's Muslims who smoke marijuana now. There's Muslims who commit zina now. And nothing happens to them because we're Muslims and we try to be lenient towards each other. So for something to even rise to the level of a police case is already unusual, even in the nation state, where even in Malaysia, the laws are still guided by Sharia, and they're still according to the ijtihad of those in authority and the ulama. They try as best as they can to implement laws that reflect the not only the letter of the law of the Sharia, but the spirit of the law, and seeking the objectives of the law in society, the objectives of the Sharia in society. I honestly don't see that there's a huge change. If you're actually looking at Muslim communities, Muslim lands, in the Muslim world, there isn't a huge change. We've gone through all different types of government systems over the last 1,400 years. We've had all different types of government systems, different types of authoritarian type of a system, different degrees of centralization. I mean, if you talk about, for example, like Malaysia, for example, used to be a much bigger territory. Nusantara, it used to be a much bigger territory. Say Morocco, Maghrib, that used to be a much bigger territory. Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Asham, that's a much bigger territory with a centralized government for that province, which is then reports back to the supreme authority in the land, the political authority of the Khalifa. But there's a much larger territory that's centralized to one authority, an emir, a governor, a sultan, or what have you. In like Maghrib was Morocco, it's Tunisia, it's part of Libya, it's Algeria. It's a huge part of land. It's a huge space of land that's centralized. So we're less centralized now than we ever were, in fact, because it's a smaller, we're more localized, say. We're more localized and more regionalized than we ever were. Our governments in each so-called nation state are governing over a smaller territory than they used to. And so there tends to be, a greater level of the kind of thing that Hallaq talks about in terms of the community sort of policing itself, and the community that the leaders sort of follow the will of the population more, and reflect the will of the population more and the values of the population more because they're from among them and so on. That's more the case now than it used to be in the so-called pre-modern era. And that's all I'll say. I know you have to go.
All right. So I would like to close now. Next week we will discuss the last two chapters. He's going to talk about the global economy and morality, how it impacts morality. So I hope to find something that I can reconcile with what we are, acquainted with about, private wealth and governance and all of that. That's aligned with the the objectives of the Middle Nation aims. So, but anyway, thank you for everyone for participating, and I look forward to the final discussion on the last two chapters, which will be a relief, to be frank. But I'm going to plow through it. I mean, I have to because I've taken on the responsibility. But I'm glad that everyone has showed up, and I hope that we can conclude. All right. So, Jazakallah khair once again, everyone, and I'll see you all next week. Until next time.
I'm really
Assalamualaikum.
sorry for the recommendation, Selma. You're really hating this book. I was like looking forward
No,
to
don't
it.
worry. No, not at all. No.
Discussions
We
are
all
very
voted
heated.
on this. No, please don't take it that way. Okay. I will end now. Assalamualaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.